Family-owned Gig Harbor Brewing has been making delicious, easy-drinking beers since 2015. Come by one of our tap rooms, the Harbor Tap Room along the waterfront in Gig Harbor, or our Tacoma Tap Room and Brewery on South Tacoma Way in Tacoma. Visit the tap rooms, mention the code word GIGLY, and we'll take $1 off your first pint. For the most up-to-date taproom info, please Google Gig Harbor Brewing or find us on Facebook and Instagram. This is Gig Harbor Brewing founder John Fosberg, and I'll see you in the tap rooms.
I remember that time when we had a last fight. Words were said out of line. They were your words, not mine. Do you ever look back and think about all the things you could have said? Replay them over again inside your head. This is the Revisionary Podcast. Stories of all we would have done in the past. This is the Revisionary Podcast with your host, Juan Carlos. The Revisionary Podcast.
Have you ever experienced anything difficult and not felt like you had an outlet? I'm Haley Crow, the host of Facilitating Voices, an outlet podcast, where we discuss complex topics surrounding mental health, social justice issues, and interview people with real and raw experiences and exposures to trauma. Tune in to learn, grow, and realize you're not alone. New episodes released weekly on the Chatter Network.
This is the Revisionary Podcast. Stories of all we would have done in the...
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Revisionary Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Juan Carlos. So, welcome back. This is the podcast where people come and tell stories about things they wish had happened a little bit differently in their lives, and then have an opportunity to retell the same exact story, except the second time, they can change any facts or details that they would like about the story. This has been a fun time for me. I must say, I got back into doing a little bit of the Zoom shows. I was just curious how that would go. You know, I remember back in 2020 when the world shut down the first time, everyone started doing all these Zoom comedy shows, and I kind of like raised my nose at it and was like, ugh, it's not the same thing as live comedy. I could never. And you know what? I kind of regret it because I lost out on an opportunity to make a lot of connections and just like get to know everyone and also develop a new skill, which is what I've learned from this whole ordeal. You know what I mean? You should never really turn your nose away at developing a new skill. You should practice everything you can. You should try to become a little well-rounded and, you know, just learn a little bit about a lot. And I missed out on a lot of networking opportunities, I think, more than anything. But with that being said, I have reversed course and I've tried to do a little bit more of the Zooms, and I will say they're very awkward at first, right? Like the first couple of times you do it, you feel really uncomfortable. And I've talked about this in the past with some of the guests. Like, you know, it's a little awkward because you're sitting there and like you don't really hear the laughs because a lot of people are on mute. You kind of have to look at your screen. Your timing's a little different. I never realized how much I feed off of the energy of crowds. So like when it's just me in a room by myself, like the energy is not there to feed, so I have to like bring my own energy. It's like a completely different endeavor, but I've been taking them on, and it's been kind of exciting to do. It's been kind of fun. I'm slowly but surely getting better at it. I still have work to do. Don't think that I don't, but you know, I'm getting better. But it's a different skill is really what I've learned more than anything. And coincidentally, right, I promise you that wasn't a segue or anything. That this just happened to work out the way it did. I actually met our guest this week during a virtual event. This week we actually have DB Frick. I'm actually really excited to sit down with him. So we have a mutual friend named Ronnie Pascal, who was a previous guest on the Revisionary Podcast. And Ronnie used to run like an online improv show, and was gracious enough to let me participate in the show, which was a lot of fun, by the way. I really enjoyed doing that with Ronnie. And I actually met DB through Ronnie on that show. And I really enjoyed working with DB that one time. And, I've kind of been following him on social media. So I was really excited when he agreed to be on the podcast. I'm looking forward to getting to know him a little bit better. For me, it's always fun to get to know new people. I think that's probably one of my favorite things about doing this podcast is the fact that I get to catch up with old friends, or I get to meet new people who I might not have had an opportunity to connect with, and then we get to share this moment together, and then you guys get to listen to it. So that's kind of fun for me. But without further ado, let's see if we can get DB on the line.
Hello.
Hey, how are you, DB?
Hey, how you doing? Good to hear from you. I'm doing good.
I'm doing great, and thank you for joining us on the Revisionary podcast. How's everything going in your world?
I'm very, very lucky. Happy to be alive every day.
So, what have you been up to lately?
I've had so many things actually coming at me. I am consulting for a week. I did most of it already for a Comedy Central show going into its third season. And
Okay.
That's been fun. It's only been Zoom meetings, and the show hasn't started filming its third season yet, but we're doing a lot of pitches trying to get the story arc for the season and try to make it more interesting, so that they got a bunch of consultants in because they don't want to have to pay writers and give Writers Guild credit.
Jeez. Why would Comedy Central ever do that?
I can't even blame Comedy Central. I can't say, because my check doesn't say Comedy Central. So I can't blame Comedy Central, but they are definitely part of it. And they are always bringing in consultants for TV shows. And then one of the things that they brought me in for is because of my understanding of dysfunction.
Oh. Without going into what you're working on specifically, would you care to elaborate on that?
I just come from a very dysfunctional family, and I have I've been arrested a couple of times. Not for anything major, no violent crimes, but stupid things, and just a very, very dysfunctional family. But some of the other things I'm doing, I'm also hosting a open jam for Second City. Out of LA, which I'm really excited about doing. That's on Wednesdays. I look for this is a lot of fun for me. I've always wanted to be part of the history of Second City, so I consider myself very lucky to do that.
Let me ask you this, because I've had the opportunity to, to kind of follow your career from afar, right? Like, you see the social media and all this stuff, and I feel like you put on a lot of different hats. So if you were to, I guess, describe what kind of a comedian you are, where do you feel most comfortable? Is it on the writing part? Is it the improv? Like, what do you feel is your niche?
If I had to pick one word that defined me as a comedian, it would be failure. I have a one-man show that I'm working on that's all about stories where I failed, but failed up, almost like Homer Simpson. I fail up constantly. I fall into things. I don't know if it's white privilege. It might be. But I fall into things, and I'm very lucky all the time. So
how did you start on your journey towards comedy? What was that moment when you were like, you know what? I think I'm going to try to pursue this as a career.
Pursuing it? Well, it started very young. I made my first writer's submission to Not Necessarily the News, which was a satirical political show on HBO in 1984. I was 7 years old.
Why don't we go ahead and jump right into this? And DB, the stage is yours. Go ahead and tell us your story.
All right. This is my virginity story.
Okay.
I was 20 years old when I lost my virginity. This is circa, oh my God, it had to be 1996.
Oh, wow. That's pre-Wi-Fi.
It's pre-Wi-Fi. I'm 44 years old.
Yeah.
And you could bleep that out if you want, for my sake.
That's on you.
But I went to a barbecue on July 4th out in Wantagh, New York. And I had a date with me, and I hadn't been seeing her very long, but we got into an argument, and I left with a different girl. And we kind of hit it off and really were laughing a lot, and we drove around for hours. It was the party ended pretty late. So then we're driving around, Oyster Bay. Like, we drove really far. That's far from Wantagh Park, Oyster Bay. So Oyster Bay is the home of Sagamore Hill, which was Teddy Roosevelt's home. So I decided this is I knew I was in the area, and I was like, hey, do you want to go to this place? It's really nice. And I go to the parking lot. The parking lot's always open because beyond the parking lot, there are homes, and people have to drive down that road to get to their homes. So the parking lot never closes. So I went to the parking lot, and I should have prefaced this with I have asthma. Exercise, at least it used to be exercise-induced asthma. So the walk from the car to the house is about a half a mile. So we walk, and that's fine. No exercise-induced anything. We're chatting. We're having a good time. And then we stop at one point at the top of the hill, and we start kissing. And then we stop kissing, and she asks me, why did you bring me here? And I didn't really know it in the moment. I was still a virgin at the time. I was just going someplace, just hanging out. So I realized what we were there for, and we start making out more. We start taking each other's clothes off. We're completely naked. We've taken all our clothes off. And then she's like, do you have a condom? And I knew I had a condom in the car. Right. So I put my pants on really quick. And I run half naked to the car. And halfway through that run, I can't breathe. I start and I'm like, oh my God, this is going to happen now? Are you kidding me? I fall to my knees. She can't really see me fall to my knees because of the way the hill was formed. I had to pull myself up. I'm like, this is not going to happen now. There's no way I'm going to let this happen. So I run to my car, and I go in the car. I take my keys out to unlock it, go in my car. I've had one condom in there. I don't know why I had it, but it was an old condom. I sort of left it there because I thought it was funny. And I would make fun of it with people like, hey, look, I still have this condom I'm never going to use. So I get the condom. It's sort of like, you can even see that it's kind of old and been, like the packages have been played with. So I take it. I end up locking the door and the keys in the car. And, and I'm like, and this is an 87 Cutlass Supreme. So it was like, we probably could have gotten it open if we had a hanger, but we didn't have a hanger.
Right.
So I'm like, all right, F this. I got to push myself through it. So I start booking back up the hill. Halfway up the hill, I fall again. And I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? Okay, I pull myself back up. And there I could see her at the top of the hill, sitting there, waiting for me at the top of the hill. So I run to her. I fall to the ground when I get there. She jumps right on top of me. She said, I dropped the condom. She takes the condom off the ground and she starts opening it. And I'm like breathing heavily. And she just thinks like I'm really into it. And I somehow muster up the energy to be able to maneuver through the sex act. Yeah. And I'm still breathing heavily. And it's really quick. Like it happens, it's like 30 seconds. It must have been awful for her. So I'm like breathing heavily. And eventually she realized, she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, I think I need an ambulance because I can't breathe. I'm having an asthma attack. I was able to let her know. Now she has to go wake up one of the houses nearby. Nobody had a cell phone. Right. If I did, it would be like one of those G.I. Joe big ones that's like huge. We didn't have it.
Was the Zach Morrison phone.
The Zach Morrison, right. He goes to the house. It's like 2 or 3 in the morning. She knocks on the door, and there's a man comes to the door. And she explains to him what's happening, and they call an ambulance. The ambulance comes, like it takes about 10 minutes. And I'm actually feeling a little better, but we've already called the ambulance. So I get into the ambulance when the ambulance gets there, and I tell her to drive my car home. But I forget about the keys. She forgets about the keys, and I forget that the door's locked. So she ends up having to sleep at that house with that guy. Now, I found out years later that she actually slept with that guy that night. So I'm in the hospital. She's sleeping with this guy. That's part one of the story. That's sort of where it ends. Like, I ended up seeing her after that, and she went to Amsterdam for school, and I ended up visiting her in Amsterdam, which was an incredible experience. So, flash forward 5 years later, I'm dating someone else. It's actually more than that. It's more like 7 years later. It's 2005. So I'm dating someone else. So I'm telling her this story, and she's like, oh, you know what? I like that. I want to make that happen again for you. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do it again. Like, even if it's, but she pushed me, and I was like, all right, let's do it. Go up there. It's a little earlier in the night. Like, it's almost like it's dark, but just getting dark. So we go to the top of the hill. There's no asthma this time.
Thank God.
But thank God. That would be really crazy if that happened again. But we do the act, and as we're doing the act, at the bottom of the hill where the road is that leads to all the other houses, you see a funeral procession that could obviously see us because I could see them.
Oh, no.
This funeral procession, and it's about 500 to 800 feet away, but they could still tell. This is passing, and she notices, and I notice, and we get our clothes on, and she's like really embarrassed. And so I had sex on Teddy Roosevelt's lawn twice, and I imagine the only other person that could say that was probably Teddy Roosevelt. Flash forward, I'm living in LA. This is 2009, 2010. I get the opportunity to audition for Oprah Winfrey's game show, Are You Normal America? Which was awful. God awful so much that you won't even find it on YouTube. Oprah made sure that nobody can find this show because it was so bad. There were like 3 hosts, and it involved the audience, panelists, game show contestants, people at home that they would talk to, and they were trying to get a gauge of whether something was normal to Americans or not. So I'm a panelist on this show, and I get on the show because of that story. Because I tell the first part of that story, and they loved it. They thought it was great, and I get to tell a portion of that story, a really quick, like 15-second version of the story in the show. And at the end, I added like bully to the end of my story.
Okay.
I apparently pissed off a producer because when I was walking out, a producer made a point of making sure I heard, I hate when panelists make up lines that we didn't tell them. And I didn't really care. The damage was done. I actually added a funny thing that the audience laughed at. Maybe they wanted somebody else to say it. I don't know. But I ended up losing that game, that episode, to an 85-year-old man who had sex with a 25-year-old at his wife's funeral.
Oh, Lord.
I lost to that guy. Now, for me, that's hilarious. But the moral of the story to me is that Oprah Winfrey had to listen to my story about losing my virginity at Teddy Roosevelt's house. And for me, that's the greatest thing ever, that Oprah had to have listened to it and had to have okayed it. There was no way to, because she was there that day. She knew. So that's my virginity story.
Very well said. Snap, 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 snaps. Round of applause.
Thank you.
That is. So I have questions here. Not to get graphic, but just so we get a picture as to what was going on. When the procession passed, what position were you in?
Oh, I was behind her.
Oh, I see. So they definitely knew what was going on. You couldn't like play it off.
Yeah, I didn't want to give that detail because I didn't know if that was going overboard on.
No, you're good.
Show.
No. We're that makes it okay. So that explains a lot of things. At it.
We both see the funeral procession come. No pun intended.
I see what you did there.
And it's probably a good five. Felt like forever, but it was 5 to 10 seconds where we're both looking and we're like, "Is this really happening?"
So, and then here's the other thing, and I know this is not necessarily directly related, but how did you later find out what occurred the night while you were at the hospital? Like, how'd that come up?
The girl who threw the barbecue where we met, I ended up reconnecting with in like, it must have been around when I joined Facebook in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So I found out about 2009 that I was like, wow. And I never found that out from the girl herself because I don't know where she is. I don't know what she's doing. I've looked her up, but there's a lot of women that go by the same name. So it's actually somewhat hard to find her. But yeah, that was, I appreciate those questions. Those are great questions.
No, of course. I just want to, like, I want everyone listening, I want the revisionaries to have a clear picture as to what was going on, So okay. So now, why did you pick this story to go tell on the Oprah show? Like, what about this story has always called your attention?
It was my most salacious story. I knew it was going to get attention. I just knew that if people heard someone was having sex on the lawn at Teddy Roosevelt's house, that they were probably gonna pick it.
So let's jump right back into this, DB. Go ahead. The stage is yours again. Go ahead and retell us your story.
This is my revisionist story for the revisionaries out there. I lost my virginity when I was about 15. I was a Boy Scout, and I was an Explorer Scout. And if you know anything about the Boy Scouts and Explorer Scouts allowed girls in.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That is true. Yeah, they've been doing that for years. And we were a Boy Scout troop, but we would pull in Explorer Scouts to some of our events. So we would have girls at our events. Right. Now, we had this one trip to Teddy Roosevelt's house. And I, was walking with this girl, and there's a path that goes all the way down. I don't know if I said this, but I have asthma. So there's a path that goes all the way down to the beach. And she decides that she wants to run down this path, this other 15-year-old girl who I had never met her before. Like, we would just, that would happen to me a lot, where I would just click with someone and meet someone on the first time and become like best of friends. Right. So she runs down to the beach, and she gets a real head start. And again, I'm a heavy guy, always was big. So I decide I'm going to chase her down myself. I'm going to chase, and I chase her all the way to the beach, and halfway through chasing her, I have an asthma attack. So she's all the way down by the beach. So I start screaming for help. And there is no help to come, because you can't really hear someone who has asthma screaming for help. So it's like, and so I push myself to the beach, almost crawling on my knees, holding trees as I'm walking through the forest that leads to the beach. So there she is. She sees me holding on to these two trees, and she sees me by the water, and she says, "Run to me." And I'm standing with the hands on the trees. I'm like, I can't. And she's like, well, then I'll run to you. And she runs to me. She throws her arms around me, and she tackles me, and we fall down to the ground. And she starts making out with me and pulling at me, and, and we're, start taking each other's clothes off, almost like some natural thing, some just instinct. And there were other houses that you have to walk past down this path. So there was a family having a birthday party for a 5-year-old at the house. And these are mansions. These are huge mansions, but the wall could see over, and we didn't hear them at first, but some kids start walking over to the wall, and they're like, hey, as kids would do. If I was 5 and I saw it, I would try to get people to watch the other kids to watch it too. Look what's going on. So all these kids converge, and we're out there having sex. And then we notice these kids, and we're like, oh shit. And then parents start walking over to the kids, and then we get really scared and start putting all our clothes on. Yeah. And then, like, I, with all my strength that I can, and sometimes, like, your, what's the word I'm looking for? When...
Fight or flight?
Yeah, exactly. But, like, your endorphins kick in, and you get all this power.
Oh, adrenaline.
Adrenaline, thank you, that you wouldn't normally have. So she runs up the hill. She's much faster than me. And I am running up the hill, too. And one of the men from the party ends up catching me and throwing me to the ground. And I'm still, like, not breathing. And he actually doesn't understand why. He thought that he just... Because this asthma attack that I'm having, he didn't realize that I was having it at first. So then he sees that I'm having this asthma attack. So he calls the police. He calls the ambulance to come. Now, there's no... the guys from the ambulance couldn't bring the ambulance down that path to the beach.
Right.
This is a walking path. So I have to try with my energy to get a little further. Now I'm only able to get another 1/3 of the way further. So they have to, then the ambulance shows up about 10 minutes later, and they have to bring out a stretcher and carry me. Now I was probably about 230 pounds at the time. So these two guys from the ambulance are having trouble pulling me through the forest. So as they're pulling me through, I end up falling off the thing twice because it's so bumpy that I end up falling off. And I'm still having my asthma attack. They hit me with an EpiPen, which helps, but they still take me into the ambulance. Now, all the other Boy Scouts at this point found out about this and were down by the ambulance, and they see me going into the ambulance. And I say to one of the guys, so that they knew, I thought maybe I was like going to die. I had never been hit with an EpiPen before. It had never gotten to that point, but I hadn't had a lot of asthma attacks. I'd only had a handful in my entire life. So I tell one of the guys, because I just want you to know, just in case I die, I had sex with her on the beach just now in the forest. At the edge of the forest and towards the beach. I just wanted you guys to know. But she was standing right behind me when I told the other Boy Scout that. So she was horribly embarrassed. We had just met. We didn't know each other. So she thought it was absurd. Flash forward 5 years later, I'm dating another girl. And I decide we're going to go to a Teddy Roosevelt event. They had an event, and we went inside the house this time. And the inside is beautiful. It's like all wood. It's all like rich, deep oaks and deep redwoods. It's beautiful, almost everything. And then there's animals everywhere that he killed and shot over the years. So many, and bearskin rugs, and beautiful place. And we had a group of about, these tours wouldn't be very big. They'd be about 10 people. We snuck in with that tour. We didn't pay for that tour. That's not really all that important, but I'm very good at sneaking into places, despite my size. So we go into the house, and I tell her this story about Teddy Roosevelt. And she's like, oh, wow, let's make that happen here again.
Oh, I see.
And I'm like, what? You want in the house? Like, you want to do this in the house? There's a tour here. I don't really know if that's such a good idea. And she's like, oh, we could do it really quick. Just do it. I think you need a good experience having sex here. And I was like, okay, very apprehensive. So we decide to go into a closet, which said water closet on it. At the time, I didn't know what water closet meant. It just means bathroom. But we go in there. We end up, fooling around. We have each other's clothes off. And then someone opens the door. And it's the cleaner, the guy who cleans the place. And he sees us. He doesn't really say anything. He grabs a broom and leaves. Closes the door. We leave the room. We get back to the tour. We see him again on the way out. And he winks at me. He gives me a wink. And like a thumbs up, kind of. And I'm like, all right. So, I mean, we end up leaving. And flash forward 5 years later, I'm living in LA and I'm auditioning for Jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
And they want quick stories like that little blurb. Like, what are you going to say? Like if you got on the show.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, well, I lost my virginity on Teddy Roosevelt's lawn. They asked me to leave. And I had to do a walk of shame down the entire hallway because there were probably about 50 producers on the show that watched these auditions. And everybody stared at me on the way out. And it was embarrassing. But the moral of the story is Alex Trebek, before he died, heard my story about me losing my virginity to Teddy Roosevelt. And it's what killed him.
That's what got him the thought of you in the throes of passion.
And it was like 15 years later that it killed him, but he thought about it so much. It was swirling in there. Couldn't get over it.
It's the silent killer. Oh my god. All right, hold on. I have questions here. I noticed that in the retelling, you chose to change your age. What was the reasoning behind that?
I think that I had a lot of opportunities to lose my virginity before I was 20, but I just wasn't smart enough to see the signals that I was getting. And I think that if I started earlier, I would be less interested in sex. But I think I went with 15 in part because 20 is so old. 20 is really old. I mean, it's not like, thinking back, it's not all that important, the age of what someone loses their virginity.
Before I let you go, we have two traditions on this podcast. The first is we like to highlight a charity or an organization that's important to our guests. Do you have one for us?
Yeah. So St. Jude's is important. Those people don't pay a dime to have their children helped.
I think that's very well said.
So yeah, thank you for that opportunity to highlight that charity.
No, of course. Thank you. And for the revisionaries out there who are listening, if you have an opportunity, please feel free to support the St. Jude's. We like to ask our guests to share a quick childhood story that puts a smile on their face. So the first one that comes to mind. Yeah, I know. I didn't prepare you for this.
No, that's fine. You have editors. A quick childhood story. You know what's so funny? I recently auditioned for another game show, and
sure.
Jay Leno has a new game show on ABC, I think, and it's a remake of Groucho Marx's "You Bet Your Life" or something like that. And a producer called me, and we did a Zoom. And they were like, "Oh, you're great. I was funny through the whole interview." And they were like, "Hey, do you have a story?" And I kept on going through all my stories, and it's a family show, so I can't tell the virginity story. I can't tell the story about farting in front of Martin Scorsese for 4 hours. I can't tell the stories about my dad cooking a parrot accidentally the night before Thanksgiving because he was drunk and left it on the radiator. So I'm like trying to find like these good, wholesome stories, and I couldn't come up with anything. Like I had nothing. I couldn't even make something up. All I had in my head was these terrible things. But something from my childhood. I'm remembering a birthday party. And it was a small birthday party. And my father, who's not with us anymore, brought me and a handful of my friends to see Mannequin, the movie, with Andrew McCarthy and Kim Cattrall as the mannequin. And I just remember feeling great about it and sort of falling in love with Kim Cattrall on the screen. And I wish I had something like nicer or more prolific or more interesting, but a birthday party is what's coming to mind. Or, you know what? Here's another one. Here's another quick one. When I was a kid, I had one of those four-wheelers, like not a big ATV, but like a mini ATV for a kid. I figured out how to hotwire it so that it would go on its own as a 10 years old, just change the wires, and the car would drive on its own. So I remember doing that, and my cousin was watching, and the car ended up driving down the driveway into the street, and a car ran over it.
Oh, no.
And they got out of the car thinking that maybe they ran over a kid. Luckily, they didn't run over a kid, but it was totally my fault. And I would always get into trouble like that. I would just, stupid things. But I was so excited that I was like, I can hotwire my toys? It was, the coolest thing. It was in the 80s. All those movies were hotwiring. All those movies from the 80s, someone was hotwiring a car.
I gotta say, that is hilarious, because I'm imagining this person, freaking out for a solid maybe 3 seconds before they realized.
Yeah, I'm sure it seemed like forever too, and it was a husband and wife, and they got out, and I remember them being so mad at me, and my parents heard the crash and then came outside, and it was just went from 0 to 100 really quick.
That is phenomenal. Thank you for sharing that story with us.
Thank you.
Do you have any last words for the revisionaries?
If you want to check out any of my stuff, you can Google DB Frick, or you can go to Welcome Back to America, which is a podcast where I interview entertainers and we talk about what got them into the entertainment business.
Sure.
You can find that all over Welcome Back to America with DB Frick and the Not Quite Ready for Jihad Players, which has gotten me into some trouble, but not enough yet to change the title. I also am hosting on Wednesdays. I host a open improv jam for Second City, which is a lot of fun. There's a lot of people come down. There's about 30 people every week. I do shows for a company called Extreme Improv, which is out of the UK. That's run by a guy named David Riley Pristansky, and I do weekly shows with them. Played characters in different games. That's a lot of fun. What else am I doing? We'll see. We'll see in the coming weeks. I'm amazed at 44. I still have opportunities that come my way.
How about this? Where can we follow you?
You can follow me anywhere. I'm on Twitter. That's at DB Frick. I'm on Instagram. That's at DB Frick 1977. Facebook, DB Frick. LinkedIn is Daniel Frick, because I had to change my name when I joined the Screen Actors Guild and Actors Equity because there was another Dan Frick. Now, here's a funny story about that. I won't make this long, but I knew back in 1998, I was interning at Sony Pictures, and they had a database of names. Sure. And I would look up people all the time, and I remember Googling my own name and finding out that there was another Dan Frick who was an actor who did some movies. He was in Baby's Day Out and did a couple of other movies that he was credited for. So I remember seeing that, and I always knew, I was like, I'm going to have to change my name if I ever join, because I don't want to get mixed up with him. So when I joined, changed my name, and I didn't work on my IMDb page until the last 2 years. Once the pandemic started, I put my IMDb page up. Now, when I did it, this guy's not alive anymore. When I did it, it took all of his movies and put them under my name now. So there are 3 movies on IMDb that I get credit for that I didn't do. And one of them is Baby's Day Out, where I play, I'm a bus driver. One of them is called Stricken, and still makes kind of sense, like it could be 13 in it. But then there's a movie called The Hunter, and I play a driver, a taxi driver. But that was 1980, and I was 3. So I get credit for that. And I think it's the funniest thing, and I could probably change it, but I got to talk, I have to have IMDb do it, and they're not easy to get on the phone. But I always found that funny. So I chose DB Frick because my mother used to date a guy who was the editor of Mademoiselle magazine. I went to lunch with him once, and my name is Daniel Barry Frick, he was like, you know what? If you ever get the chance and you want to be a writer or entertainer, change your name to DB. Then I met a teacher, a writing teacher who also had the name DB. And after that, I changed my name.
That's pretty cool. Also, if you ever figure out the IMDb thing, let me know, because I have a similar issue. But I have a credit who's listed under, it's my credit and it's listed under me. It's just listed under me under a different name for a different, it's it's like a complicated, but they're both my names. It doesn't make sense. Anyway,
it takes a little bit of figuring out. There are ways to do it, but I almost like it because I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, no, that's very funny. So I wanted to thank you for joining us on the Revisionary podcast.
Thank you, Juan Carlos.
I've had a great time.
This was a ball. This is really great. You have a great show here, man. This is fun.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it. And without further ado, I guess all we have left to do is say goodbye to the Revisionaries.
Bye-bye, Revisionaries. Thank you for listening.
All right. Take care.
The Revisionary Podcast.
So, yeah, I didn't know where any of that was gonna go. Here we are, desecrating, I guess, the outside of historic landmarks. No, I think that's interesting. I'm at a loss for words. You know, my favorite part is. Not my favorite. That's not the right term here. But I thought his whole twist was hilarious. Like the things that he chose to describe, and you know how he went about it. You know what I appreciate? I appreciate the approach he took to this exercise. He actually treated it as a creative exercise and try to, like, you know, change things around a little bit. You know what I mean? Come up with new ideas and, like, you know, use some of the facts and interweave it into his, you know, from his original story, interweave it into the new story. So I really appreciated all the effort that he put into it. And honestly, I had a good time chatting with DB. He you know, I don't know. He's someone I would love to work with again in the future, because I think we just had a natural, like, kind of chemistry and vibe with each other. So that was really interesting. I wanted to say to all of you listening again, thank you so much for all of the support. This podcast has continued because of you. You guys are the reason for my successes. And I want to say, as I always do, Revisionaries, thank you for listening.
This is the Revisionary Podcast. Stories of all we would have done in the past.
This podcast was brought to you by Gig Harbor Beer Festival. Tickets are now on sale for the 11th annual Gig Harbor Beer Festival, Saturday, May 14th in beautiful Gig Harbor, Washington. Some of your favorite Puget Sound breweries will be pouring their most popular beers at this annual community event. Award-winning Heritage Distillery will be pouring at their very popular Heritage Lounge, and live music throughout the day on the Uptown Gig Harbor Pavilion stage. Tickets are available at Eventbrite, or visit gigharborbeerfestival.com and click on Buy Tickets. See you at the Gig Harbor Beer Festival on Saturday, May 14th. Brought to you in part by Washington State Lottery.